All right, getting some folks joining here. Hey, everyone, just come on in, make yourself comfortable. We've opened it a little bit early just so folks can get in early. Got some folks rolling in. Hi, Bob. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Richard. Hey, Susan. Hey, Joe. Hey, Jennifer. Hi, Anne-Marie. Hi, Anju. Shelly. John. Lots of folks joining in. Hey, Jim, how you doing? Hope you're still dodging the icy weather there. Melissa. All right, we'll just get started. Okay, we're at 4:15. We'll just wait for more folks to keep joining in since we've got folks coming in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. As always, feel free to go into Hoova and look in the chat here under the session. We'll be interacting in the chat here. Okay, and then we'll get started in just a second. Hi, Loredana, how are you? Hey, Julie. What a great day it's been. I am so inspired by today and the last couple of days by all seeing these amazing, amazing people that we owe so much gratitude for leading us and guiding us in the journey the last 20 years. It's really been inspiring. I'll never forget this day. All right. Hello, everyone. Okay. I think we've kind of, wow, we've topped out. Got a good audience here. So welcome everyone to the Stalwart Agile Fishbowl session with George Dinwiddie. We are here to talk all about estimation, Agile estimation. I mean, talk about a subject that has been coming up again and again over the last, as long back as we can remember, is how do we estimate, right? Uncertainty is central to the nature of the problem that we're dealing with. How do we deal with estimation? Today we have George Dinwiddie with us. He has a book that just came out last year, and on estimation, part of the Pragmatic Programmer series, probably the most down-to-earth, practical approach to estimating that teaches you how to think about estimation. It is agile at its heart, and urge, if anyone doesn't have it, absolutely it should be part of your bookshelf. Today we are here with the author George Dinwiddie, our very own from the local DMV community, and we are here to conduct a fishbowl session. So a fishbowl session, I'll let George kind of talk about the intent and the how we're going to run it, and we're going to ask for your participation. Use the raise hand function that you should have right down here. There's a button called raise hand. Be prepared to use that if you want to participate. You'll have a chance to ask George a question about estimation or about anything in general. Agile estimation is the theme. It's the topic that we're here to discuss. So if you are interested in talking, you can share your video, I believe, and you can we will make you a panelist on this discussion. We can't have everyone at once, so I will just look to see at the folks that have their hand raised, and then I will select the first four to step on up and ask your question. And we'll make you panelists. You can share your video and you can ask questions. We'll have a panel of 4 people at one time, and then we'll kind of rotate. We'll rotate folks in and out of the panel that you can have this conversation with George. And so we'll do it. We'll gauge it by folks that use the raise hand function. So I will hand it over to George, and then he will kind of kick it off, talk a little bit about what's the intent that we want out of our conversations here. And then he will let you know when it's time to raise your hands if you would like to participate and ask questions. So thank you all. George, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Matthias. So let's make it 4 people, including me, so it all fits on one screen.
Okay.
So this is going to be a little different from what we've done, so far today. It's kind of like a panel, but if you're familiar with the fishbowl format, in physical life, typically that's with a few chairs in the middle in a circle, and then the audience around it. And always one chair is left empty so that a member of the audience can come join the conversation. And if all the chairs fill up, somebody who's been there needs to leave so that there's always room for somebody to join. So we're going to simulate that with the raise hand. And when somebody joins and it's full, then somebody else will have to leave. That doesn't mean you're out forever. If you've got more to say, you can raise your hand again. We'll make it work. And it's not just a question and answer, it's a multi-way conversation. So we can get, more into the details, more into how different people view things. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, we'll get started. So I know some of you have some questions about what estimation has to do with Agile.
All right, here we go. We've got one. Oh, don't unraise your hand. Raise it and leave it raised, please. Okay, yeah. There we go.
You can unraise your hand if you're in the panel and you want to leave, and that'll signal that.
All right, I've promoted one person who raised their hand. Ricardo, do you want to share your video? All right, Jubin, promoting you.
So maybe the video is not going to work out for everybody.
There we go.
Hi, Jubin. You're on mute right now.
Yeah, we can't hear your audio. Maybe you can check it out.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Great.
Okay, great.
So what's on your mind, Jubin?
Oh, so we do estimate to a certain extent as a part. So we follow safe principles, and we do a breakout session just at the beginning of the program increment or the PI, and then we leave it at that. And then as we go through the backlog refinement, we just kind of change the estimates, the story points, but it helps us in a ways to help us fill the program increment, because we do work for different clients under the same product. It just helps us to prioritize. So I've seen a lot of resistance or different thoughts that, yeah, estimation may not be totally useful, but it helps us to ballpark our like a range of numbers. So it helps us to prioritize and help us to see if our priorities are towards the revenues or priorities are towards the client feedback. So it certainly helps to a certain extent here.
Okay. So when you do this, now you're estimating a program increment. Is that the same as your iteration length?
No. So when you say iteration, do you mean sprint?
Yes.
No, program increment is every 4 months.
4 months, okay.
And the sprint is every 2 weeks.
So you estimate 4 months worth of stories at a time.
Not exactly. No, not exactly. No, we don't go to that level of extent.
Oh,
We
okay.
can't. Yeah, but we try to fill the major portion of the program increment
Okay.
to help us either say no or help escalate of conflicting priorities to the management so that they can do a rebalancing act, because at
Good.
times we get requests every 2 weeks. Oh, this is something which is critical for the next release, can you do that? It just helps us to kind of balance that at first instance, saying okay, we have some bandwidth or probably we don't. If
Okay.
everybody comes with a priority, we just have to escalate it, saying okay, there are items getting filled into the bucket and need somebody to help with the prioritization.
Okay, good. And how's that working for you? Do you generally find that everything that you chose to fits into the program increment, or do you extend the program increment if you need to, or do you leave stuff out?
No, we never extend it.
Okay.
Our time are planned well because we do like it's multiple arts going in together. So we can't extend the timeline, but then we have to leave something out or break it into phases so that whatever is critical can be done for that program increment and the non-priority ones,
Okay.
the next program increment.
Yeah. So you trim the different items to fit, in other words.
If we have to trim, yes.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
At times what happens is like we work at different programs and at product levels. So the thing is each program may have its own flavors of changes, or their clients come back with requests to delay or add something more, in which case we have to rebalance it. So those rough numbers at the beginning help us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how often do you or under what conditions do you go back and reevaluate, what you estimated at the beginning?
Oh, could you ask that again? Sorry.
So how often or under what conditions do you go back and look at those estimates again?
We don't look back at the estimates for accuracy. We just kind of ballpark it. So we call it the breakout. So each breakout, say for example, we are catering to a client or a functionality, we just do a breakout for the rough estimations. So it's like 2, 3, 5 points. Highest number gets the vote. It's a minute and a half per story if those are carved out. But towards the end of the program increment, if there are conflicting priorities and things that have not been done, we just have to reevaluate in terms of what's pending, because there are dependencies. It's a little complex. So yeah, we just have to evaluate only if we are at a time where there are a lot of stories in the backlog. Otherwise, generally it's 90% reasonably well planned.
Okay.
A lot of emphasis on extreme planning. It just helps us to look at like every 4 months.
That sounds
Well,
good. So do you ever have the situation where you get everything done and you still got time left?
rarely, because we do keep getting requests every 2 weeks to add something.
Okay. So you get some unplanned work in there too.
Yeah, at times. We
Yeah,
just have to balance out. Yeah.
that's common.
We have a strong product owner. So okay, so there's another panelist. If I can hand over to Laura if she wants to participate.
So yeah, so we can continue this discussion and it can branch off, go in different directions. Oh, Laura, you disappeared.
So I was just saying we do have a strong product owner who balances out that well too. So between the two of us, it's a good balance for
Okay,
us to say, okay, these are the opportunities or challenges we have.
Hey George, how's it going?
good.
Yeah, I was just looking at some of the topics in your book, and I have a similar situation on one of my.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it looks like she's having connection problems with the bandwidth.
Okay.
Hang on, Laura. Just see if you can get on. We'll definitely keep
We'll
you
just keep
warm.
going, and you can insert her as soon as she gets back on.
Yeah. Uh, hmm. Okay. Paul was there. You are. Paul, are you there?
I am, and I've.
Hey, Paul.
Hmm.
Uh-oh, now Paul froze.
Can you guys hear me, George?
Yes.
Hey, George, this is Raj.
All right, Raj, it seems like you have a stable connection. So,
Okay, perfect.
all right.
Hey, George, it's been a while. How are you? So,
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I have a couple of questions. I know in the past we've had lots of conversations around this, but from your book, you talk about the coastline paradox, and Dan North talks about estimation being fractal in nature. I think there's parallels towards what you said in your book and what Dan North says. What I'm curious about is whether you can sort of explain that for the benefit of all of us. What the coastline paradox is when it comes to estimation, and what important lessons can we take away in our day-to-day sort of jobs.
So one of the things is the more detail you look at, the bigger things look like. So the coastline paradox is, if you try to measure how, what's the circumference of Great Britain, and so that depends on what length of ruler you're using. Because the shorter the ruler, the more that it conforms to the ins and outs of the coastline. It's not, a regular size thing. So, if you're using a 5-mile ruler, you'll get a different number than if you're using a 1-mile ruler than if you're using a 1-inch ruler.
Yeah.
So, and you find the same thing happens when people are estimating work too. If they've broken it all down into, little tiny stories, then, and they add up each one of those, it starts to look like a huge amount of work. And because they're just comparing story to story, and they're not comparing, larger functional aspects that they've done in the past to what they anticipate this one. So it can get sort of unmoored from a solid reference point.
You mean from the bigger picture?
Right.
So what is your guidance? Because I think there's different ways you do estimation, the decomposition way of doing it. Maybe you're breaking it into these little tiny things, but what you're saying is be cautious about that. Is what you're suggesting.
Well, and I think you need to start with what are your needs for this estimate. So Jubin was just talking about estimating, a program increment that was 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, he's not doing that down at the story level, because if you tried to create 4 months worth of stories up front, you're going to find that some of those are not the right stories, because you learn things along the way and you say, oh, well, we, what we thought we wanted isn't quite right. We want to change this story. Oh, that means we need to change that aspect of all these other stories. And we've spent all this time breaking stuff into stories. I know places where they say, oh, we can't split the stories because this backlog of stories has already been approved.
Yeah.
And so you're stuck and you lose the agility. So when you're estimating for longer periods of time, you need to estimate in larger chunks. And then that doesn't necessarily, when you're coming through and estimating, well, what are we going to do in the next 2 weeks? Trying to right size that, you really need to use a different set of measurements. It's really hard to relate the two directly.
So do you think that is your guidance then that don't try to reconcile the two? So there's the increment based sort of a different ruler, if you will, for getting those notional effort sizes, and then there's maybe the smaller iteration or sprintly estimates. And what I'm hearing is don't try to reconcile the two.
No, and you might, I've never really done this, but it could be interesting to look at how does that relationship change over time. There might be some useful information in there, but yeah, don't expect it to be, don't expect the relationship to be steady because it will change over time. These are estimates, these aren't measurements.
Thank you.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, George, good seeing you. Congratulations on the book, and I apologize I've not yet had a chance to read it, but it's being added to my list as we speak. I had a question for you, George. What do you think of the no estimates movement? Well, actually, for the group, if you want to explain out the no estimates movement to the group, if you're familiar with it, and then I want to get your thoughts on what you think of that concept.
Well, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to describe no estimates. When Woody first started talking about that, way back when Bob Payne and I did a session on estimating Agile 2012 or something, and we were in favor of counting stories rather than estimating at the story level, and so I thought that was what Woody was interested in, but conversations with him, I couldn't really tell exactly what he meant. He would get kind of shy when you try to pin him down. So the thing is as more and more people took up the term no estimates, what I found is that people started getting rather aggressive towards other points of view. I found it at a session at the Agile conference one time where, this was not a real situation. This was role playing, and people were getting extremely aggressive. If these managers are going to ask for estimates, then we're going to go work somewhere else, and showing no curiosity about what needs the managers had and what they were hoping the estimates would do for them. So that kind of went off. That was one of the reasons I decided I really had to write this book, was because, people were getting into fights about it, and that wasn't helping anybody. So yeah, when you get down to story points, my preference is just to count the stories. Bob and I did some number crunching back in, 2008, 2009 time period. And we found that the teams that we were working with, that predicted how much they were going to get done, the next sprint as well, sometimes a bit better than estimating. And estimating was taking, they were spending a lot of time every 2 weeks estimating stories. But once you step back from that, then you realize the business really does need to look further down the road. And in fact, estimating stories for the next 2 weeks isn't really solving the business's problems. And if you say, well, we're not going to do any estimates, well, then it's up to the business to do the estimating for you. And so they can look at, how many stories you're getting done, but they have a hard time relating how many stories you're getting done, per 2 weeks into how many stories it's going to take to get something that's meaningful to them. And so that's where the conversation comes in, and trying to look at other big chunks of work to compare, to give you something that more meaningful. And sometimes you have to go with your gut, but you can check those, check your projections along the way also, so that you can detect early, hey, we were too optimistic here, or we were too pessimistic. This is going really well. Either way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think a lot of what you said kind of mirrors exactly what I thought too, because my first impression was just like you. I thought no estimates meant moving away from relative sizing and hours into just simply counting stories. But as I read Woody's stuff, I don't think he's saying that at all. It seemed like, based on what he's reading, But Laura said it's kind of like they're always inaccurate, so why do we bother doing it? But your point's great too, George, is the reason we do it is as a team, I kind of want to try to figure out what my pacing is at a team level so I can kind of understand my capacity, maybe plan around that a bit at the team level. And at a leadership level, I think your point's great is we still kind of want to know how big these things are because I want to be able to understand if it's a certain size, I might fund it. If it's bigger than that, I might not fund it, right? And so I kind of want to be able to see that from a leadership level. So we kind of have a need for sizing on multiple layers, but I think it's just finding out effective ways versus ineffective ways to do it gets tricky, right? Which is why your book is on my list.
And so that's the question of, do we want to start this or not? You know, or should we go, you know, should we fund something else? And then once you get started, there's the question is, you know, are we going to, you know, meet our planned goal? And so estimates are great for tracking that also. So you need, you know, you don't want to just estimate the whole project as one figure. That, you know, that doesn't help you track your progress along there. But if you're tracking your progress, it's something higher than the story level, you know, at the feature level, maybe, you know, the capability level, and say, okay, we got this first feature done, and it took longer than our estimate led us to believe. Then that gives you information. It's not that you know, you can say the estimate was wrong, but estimates are always wrong. They're estimates. But what that tells you is that there were assumptions built into your estimate that weren't true. And you can figure out if you can stop and think about what those assumptions are, then you can, it's not just for estimating better in the future, but it's also for being more aware of your surroundings and what's going on so that you can make better decisions.
So George, one last question, and I'll sort of cede my space to somebody else. I think you're touching upon this, right? Estimates are estimates. When the estimates and actuals actually start drifting, what are your recommendations?
Well, so when the actual estimates and actuals differ, then I say believe the actuals.
True.
They're the truth. A lot of times people want to say, oh, that, you know, it took longer than we estimated, so therefore the team's not working hard enough. And that's silly. You know, the team is doing the work as they can. But it tells you that you know, there was something you didn't take into account in your estimate.
Sure.
And who knows what that is? You know, it could be that, oh, we're working on this platform slower than we thought. Or maybe the product owner hasn't been available enough, you know, as much as we thought. And so it takes time to get questions answered, and we have to go back and do stuff. Or maybe we get interrupted by a bunch of unplanned work. Or maybe something comes along like a pandemic that, you know, we didn't count on that. And you can think about, you know, what it is that made the actuals different from what you estimated. And that's helpful, you know, for improving your process.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I would benchmark the actuals. The estimates are estimates, just kind of initial ballpark. But that helps us to a certain extent that, okay, if you have to do a similar thing, what could it take to do a similar thing based on the actuals? But yeah, we don't want to study the variations.
And you know, you may get to a point where say, oh, this estimate was off enough that we wanted to change our plans. We want to replan. The plan we had isn't going to give us the goals we want in the time frame we want. So what's the best we think we can do? And in fact, I make a distinction between estimates and plans. There's always going to be something that goes wrong. When you're doing your estimating, you may not know what it is, but something is not going to go according to plan. That's just a given.
Always.
You know that by now. And so you need to have, you know, you need to estimate what you can and then build buffers into your plans to take care of these unknowns.
All right. We still have plenty more time. Some folks are not able to join. I'm kind of trying to help them out joining, because it seems like when they join, they're as a panelist, their video has a conflict and they get disconnected. But if anyone else wants to join and ask a question, you can share your video or just use audio only. Raise your hand and we'll add you to the discussion. Bring your topics or questions. I did see a couple of questions being posted. Laura, who was trying to join earlier, she wasn't able to connect her video, but she does say, how can you best align estimation with budgeting? How do you approach the alignment of estimation with budgeting?
Well, so so there's different ways of going about budgeting. One, you can say, we've got this initiative or this goal, and we're willing to spend this much time and money towards it. And then you want to estimate to see what might fit into that. Another way is we want to do more or less exactly this, and how much is that time and money is that going to cost us? So you can work it either way. In both of those, I think it's important to remember that your estimate is of the work being done, and there's overhead, there's unexpected stuff that comes up, and some people will try to roll that into the estimate, but I think that just confuses things. I think it's better to say, oh, we estimate this, but then we need a buffer for the unexpected. And that way you can track how much of that buffer you've consumed along the way. Whereas if you try to pad all your estimates, one, it makes people, you get something done quicker and people say, oh, well, you padded that estimate, so therefore we're not going to believe your estimates anymore. And
right.
It also makes it hard to, the unexpected things don't necessarily distribute themselves evenly across all of the chunks of work that you're estimating.
Right. All right, Matthias just joined the panel. Thank you, Matthias, for joining.
Hey, I mean, I talked earlier today about Kinevin and unpredictability and complex systems, and a lot of that, of course, plays into estimation. So, I mean, one of the definitions of complex systems is that we can't really predict, and that's part of the very nature of these systems. And so, I find estimation really, really difficult. And I think one of the things that I've been struggling with recently, or thinking about recently, is sort of the difference between micro predictability and macro predictability. Right? Like we can get pretty good at estimating velocity or counting how many stories teams can get done in a sprint, or cycle times if it's more, sort of suitable for that. But I think it's really dangerous to take that micro predictability and try to extrapolate that into the bigger picture. Because even if you get good at estimating how long it takes you to crank out a particular Lego block or something, you still don't necessarily know how many Lego blocks you're going to need in that solution of yours, or whether the Lego blocks you've been building are actually going to get you the value that you want, which introduces a whole nother level of what's the scope to produce the value the outcomes that I actually want.
Right.
And do you have any more guidance on how do I make that jump? Because once I have that micro predictability, of course, the temptation to take that and say, well, now that I know how long it takes me to, on average for the story, I can just extrapolate because I have 200 stories and now I know. How do we talk about that, and are there better ways of narrowing that cone somehow?
So Kinefin talks about, for the complex domain, Kinefin talks about probe, sense, and respond. And I think that you can use your estimates as a hypothesis to do that. So say you're trying to get a particular feature out that, by Christmas, and you can break that feature up into aspects of it, not down at the story level, but things that, chunks of stories that different aspects of the bigger picture that you're trying to do. and estimate those. And these are hypotheses. We think it will take about this long to do this part of the work. Then when you do that work, you can see, well, were we right or not? You know, did it take us longer or less time? And use that information. So this is a sensing variable now. So we probed it. We may not have had a very good idea, you know, maybe novel work to us. And so we didn't have a good idea of how long it was going to take. But, you know, we estimated as best we could. That's a probe. And then when we do the work, we compare the estimate and the reality, and that's sensing. And then we can respond to that. Well, how do we change our plan? Maybe we change our goal itself. You know, and you know, and this is a repetitive process. You know, the thing is it amazes me that Agile teams think that you should estimate up front, and then that, you know, that estimate stays true when everything else we revisit periodically and keep changing our mind on and keep it, you know, keep it fluid. And estimates are no different. You have to do the same thing. You have to revisit them and learn what is the difference between the estimate that we made and our reality. What is that telling us? And how do we want to react to that?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think like I think that's a great approach, definitely for that sort of that team level. You know, what is our throughput? I just came off a project where one of the interesting things that was definitely noticeable is that the team got pretty good at, you know, setting up sprint commitments. They had a pretty decent understanding what they could get accomplished and everything. And there was a module that we were, you know, supposedly done with. All the things that we had anticipated building into that were completed, and then we added about maybe 25% or so additional work, or maybe even more, because then when people really started dealing with it, there was all these additional edge cases that came up, all these refined, you know, permissions issues and all that extra stuff that nobody could have told us up front, because this was a modernization, a total rethinking of the process, so that the users didn't have any mental model of what this was going to look like and what the details were going to be, because they didn't have most of these capabilities of the new system didn't exist. So there was no real, you know, that they weren't going to be able to give us all these details. And so the whole thing just expanded, even though we were supposedly done. And we knew how long each Lego block was going to take, but we found we needed 25, 30% more Lego blocks to build this thing to what they absolutely needed to have. And so that's what I'm struggling with. I mean, in the end, like you said, you have to kind of maybe just adjust the scope. How much can I get done based on sort of what's the minimum releasable thing that people can live with, and when can I move on? Does that, any thoughts on how you deal with that other than that buffer? Or
Well, so I find it helpful to have a level in between, you know, the whole thing you're trying to do and the Lego blocks. So you may come up with, oh, here's a part of this, you know, this is, if you're making a Lego castle, you know, here's the turret, here's the drawbridge. Well, let's do this, and then let people start playing with the drawbridge while we go build the turret. Oh, they've discovered more things. Well, how much more did they discover? You know, 25%? Okay, maybe we should, you know, as a starting point, assume that all of the components, you know, component capabilities are going to take 25% more. And think of that. That's, you know, that's our new estimate. So there's this part that we anticipated, and then we anticipate another 25% for things that we didn't know about. So then you build the turret, you know, well, did that take 25% more? You can start, you know, calibrating your expectations and your estimates there. You know, did the requirements grow by 25% there, or was it more or less? And over time, then you can get a better feel for it. You know, you've got the fundamental problem is that at the very beginning of the project, you're ignorant, and you know that.
Right.
You know, and nothing you can do with numbers is going to change that. So you have to expect that and build into your process, including the estimation, the fact that you've got you're certainly wrong to some degree, and you have to start tracking how much you're wrong and what you can learn from it so that you can achieve your final goals the best you can with, you know, what you can afford. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, what you said is, I think, reflected in some of the, Monte Carlo approaches, right? Like every user story that we started with end up turning into 3 user stories, and then we can do some sort of statistics-based extrapolation based on, like, well, this is how likely, this is going to turn out in the end. But I mean, I think the last thing that you said is a really interesting point. At the beginning, we are, and of course it's a truism. At the beginning, we are completely ignorant, but it really means that until you have some of that basis of, like, how do things when we decompose them, how much does it explode? Without that, it's really hard to answer that question that, of course, a lot of the business folks are going to have. Hey, how long is it going to take you to give that to me? And if we have no experience, then it's just like, well, we're going to have to get started to get some data to be able to even give you a rough estimate, because at the moment if it's not comparable to anything we've done before, then how are we going to whip that estimate out of nothing? This was working on a low code platform, and supposedly was going to make everything super much a whole lot faster, and that turned out not to be quite as true as they would have liked, and we had zero basis for estimating
Yeah.
experience.
So back in the 80s, when I first got into engineering, then one of the things I learned was, this was back when project leads or project managers would fax around, lists, little pithy lists of advice. And one of the things I learned is you take your optimistic estimate and then you multiply it by 3. And, for a lot of things, I've found that turns out to be a, relatively good approximation. Not everything. A friend of mine that I knew on Rec.Boat said, well, for boat projects, what he does is he multiplies by 3 and increments the unit of time. So a project that he thought was going to take 3 days, take 3 days takes 9 weeks. But you kind of, you can fall back when you don't know the particular stuff that you're working with. You can fall back on past experience that maybe, very different technology, maybe a completely different team, but it's going to take, longer than an optimistic estimate. An optimistic estimate is the value that it can't be any shorter than that.
Right. That is the one thing we know to be true.
And so you can use this accumulated experience that you have, even when you think it doesn't apply well. Yeah. But then you want to work in a way that lets you test those assumptions. Oh, how can we test that it's going to take 3 times longer than this optimistic estimate? Can we do 1/10 of it, what we think is reliably 1/10 of it, and measure that and use that to calibrate?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the heuristics get better as we can start reducing the amount of uncertainty, the things we don't know about it. Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks.
And a lot of organizations, shoot themselves in the foot because they disband their teams and reform for every bit of work, and so the team has no track record, and so that's another unknown. Whereas if you keep the team together and bring work to them, then you not only save all the team building part, but you have some idea of how well this team works.
All right, so we're kind of coming up on the end here. I put my pirate hat on just in honor of Richard, because they were kind of telling him what's the estimate for swabbing the deck as a seaman, and he said 20 points. And so I'm putting on a pirate hat for him. So Lots of really interesting comments in the chat and some questions being bubbled up. Bob had some great comments about buffers and when to use them. And we were talking a little bit about the fear behind using buffers and whether to use them as a tool or as kind of a reactionary mechanism. Lots of interesting comments depending on, what exactly are you estimating? And in the Q&A, were some kind of questions raised is when teams are immature to Agile, George, how would you approach getting them started when it comes to estimation? When it's brand new team, they're just getting started. What's your approach to deal with that situation?
Well, they can go with their gut to start with.
Mm-hmm.
To get going with the gut will give you an optimistic estimate. And they should be able to do that. If they've never programmed before, it's probably going to even be more optimistic. But it might not be. I don't know. But you've got to start with something. But if
Right.
the less experience they've got, or either individually or as a team, then the more you want to test your assumptions about that are underlying the estimate. So you may want to in addition to the estimate that the business needed, you may want to estimate something much closer so that you can test your own assumptions earlier. Because the sooner that you can detect that you're a false assumption, the better you can deal with it, and the less mad somebody's going to get at you for your estimate being wrong.
Right.
If you wait till 2 weeks before delivery and tell them, oh, it's going to be another 6 months, they're not going to be happy with you.
Yes.
And I wouldn't either, because you knew long before then that
Right.
you weren't going to make that that target.
Right. Yeah, there's a big factor in communication involved in this whole thing, right?
And that's tough. The communication issues are oftentimes swamp the rest of the problem.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole last chapter of the book.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Yes. Yeah, they go hand in hand. There was one question here that was raised. We can end on this since this is kind of very forward looking at the future, but there were some comments on artificial intelligence. Could AI likely be better predictor for a team instead of humans trying to do it?
Possibly. I think AI is going to embed in all the optimistic assumptions that a human does.
Mm-hmm.
And AI is no better than its input. So
Yeah.
How do you if you've trained it on one project, what parameters do you have to give it about your next project in order for it to work? So basically AI is building a model-based estimation tool, but one that you can't understand.
Yeah.
So
Will be interesting for sure. So thank you all for joining, getting lots of thank yous. Bob Payne says thank you. Paul saying thank you. Jim York says thank you. Lisa says thank you. Thank you all. We had a lot of folks join this session, and really appreciate your interactions and participations. We're now going to end this session now, and we're going to go straight into the raffles. The raffle session that's going on right now. Go into Whova and you can join that session and see, and let's win some stuff and see, and kind of close off the conference with the Big Bang. So thank you so much, George. Really awesome. Thank you for writing this book and helping out the community and being just such a great resource for the community. I mean, person, not resource, person. Thank you for being the good person. All right. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
thanks, everyone.